Mr. Chairman, I think probably a lot of people aren't following this real closely. Right now, we have an integrated FAA where all of the functions of FAA are covered by user fees and taxes, 102% over the next 10 years. In this case, and we have, what's the balance in the trust fund today? $6.7 billion in the trust fund as of today. Now, this would say that the FAA programs that stay with the FAA and don't go to the new private corporation would rely on the general fund of the Treasury instead of the Airport and Airway Trust Fund, which for 37 years has been the guaranteed source of funding for these programs. Now, I know there is just like, that the airlines really want to get rid of the ticket tax. Whether they'll retain those funds, a few years ago when John Mica caused some disruption and the ticket tax expired for 2 weeks, only one airline in the United States of America reduced their ticket prices by 7.5%. The others were happy to take the $400 million in unearned earnings. And that was Alaska Airlines. Thank you very much, Alaska, and shame on the rest of you. So when the ticket tax goes away under this private corporation, are prices going to come down? Is business aviation right that coach passengers are going to pay more and first class pay less, or is everybody just going to pay more? And they'll retain that 7.5%. We don't know. But now we're going to have orphan functions from the FAA that are no longer paid for by the users, and we say, oh, don't worry, user fees. No, we're going to pay for it out of the general fund. The general fund, which is, where we're decimating time and time again. There was a news story out of Canada, and I asked about I was up there, where they polled the pilots, and they said a disaster is likely because of the cuts in the safety program that were made under the previous conservative government. Now, Trudeau is restoring those funds. I can well imagine that this administration would follow the track of the previous administration in Canada and say, we don't need to be spending all that money on inspectors and all that. I mean, I remember when Elizabeth Dole cut back dramatically on FAA inspectors. We have still never recovered from those cuts. And we've gone to virtual inspections instead of real inspections in many cases that have found problems. So this is going to make that problem amplified by 10 times. $853 million from the general fund, that is going to be a big reach. So to sever the agency in half and remove the funding source for safety, certification, and other functions of the FAA and say, oh, just go to the appropriators, they'll take care of you. We don't want to pay for that stuff. We're the ATO. We don't want to pay. Maybe the government could start charging them to certify the new routes. Maybe the government could start charging them to certify the new equipment or something. I don't know. But I don't know how we're going to pay for those absolutely vital functions. I mean, the biggest thing to the manufacturers in the United States of America is reform of certification and stability for certification to expedite that process, and we do some things in that bill to do this. But if they don't have a funding source to hire the certifiers, and we already heard testimony here earlier this year from a new entrant who has an innovative model to serve underserved cities, and he said what's holding him back is there aren't enough people in certification. He said they're doing a great job, but they are overworked. We can imagine what's going to happen in the future when the nominal funding source we have today goes away. We're still shorting them, but we aren't creating deficit by shortening them, except in people's imaginary minds, because we're raising more revenues than we need to pay for an adequate number of people in certification. This is going to make that problem worse if this amendment is not adopted. With that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Any other members?